Imagine yourself stepping into your home after a long day, the air heavy with the faint hum of summer cicadas. The door creaks shut behind you, and you reach for the light switch, expecting the familiar glow to spill across the hardwood floors. But tonight, there's nothing. No flicker, no warmth, just a suffocating darkness that presses against your skin like a damp cloth. The refrigerator's usual hum is silent. The ceiling fan, still your home, once a sanctuary, feels like a stranger's. House, hollow and lifeless. This is where our story begins, in a quiet suburban neighborhood where the rhythm of daily life is about to be shattered by a single picket fences and the soft clink of wind chimes swaying in the evening breeze. Families moved through their routines, children pedaling bikes, neighbors exchanging polite waves, the scent of freshly cut grass lingering in the air. But beneath this polished surface, a constant struggle simmered, orchestrated by one woman, Karen Whitaker, the iron-fisted president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Her name was whispered with a mix of fear and disdain, her presence as inescapable as the summer heat. Karen wasn't just a neighbor. She was a force, her clipboard a scepter, her rules a decree carved in stone. You'd see her patrolling the streets in her pristine white SUV, her eyes scanning for the smallest infractions, a mailbox slightly askew, a shrub an inch too tall, a car parked a hair too close to the curb. Her voice, sharp and clipped, could cut through the chatter of a block party like a knife. To Karen, Willow Creek was her kingdom, and she ruled with an entitlement that left no room for dissent. Her latest target was David Hensley, a quiet, unassuming man who'd moved into the neighborhood 2 years prior. David, a former electrician, kept to himself, his modest, ranch-style home blending seamlessly into the row of tidy houses. But to Karen, blending in wasn't enough. She demanded perfection, and David's front yard specifically, a small, decorative windmill he'd installed near his porch, had become her obsession. The windmill was harmless, no taller than a toddler, its blades spinning lazily in the breeze. David had built it himself, a nod to his childhood on his grandfather's farm, where the creak of a windmill was the soundtrack of summer nights. The HOA bylaws, she claimed, forbade non-approved lawn ornaments. Never mind that the rule was vague, buried in a 50-page document few had read. Karen's word was law, and she'd issued David 3 written warnings, each more threatening than the last. The final one, slipped under his door in a crisp envelope, demanded the windmill's removal by week's end or face severe consequences. David, ever the peacemaker, considered complying. He wasn't one for conflict. His days were spent tinkering in his garage, the faint smell of solder and copper wire clinging to his clothes. But something about that final warning, the way signature looped with smug authority. He'd spent years bending to the will of others, from demanding bosses to overzealous clients. This was his home, his sanctuary. Why should he bow to a woman who treated her neighbors like subjects? So, he left the windmill standing, its blades catching the sunlight in quiet defiance. The retaliation was swift and merciless. On a humid Tuesday evening, as David returned from a late shift at the hardware store, he found his house plunged into darkness. Not just a power outage, those were common enough in Willow Creek, where storms often knocked out lines, but something deliberate. His neighbors' homes glowed warmly, their windows spilling light onto the street. His breaker box, tucked in the garage, showed no tripped circuits. A call to the utility company confirmed his worst fear. His electricity had been cut off, not by a storm or a billing error, but by an HOA directive. Pull the plug on David's home. Imagine yourself standing in David's shoes, the air thick with the scent of warm asphalt and blooming jasmine, yet your home feels like a tomb. The refrigerator's contents would spoil by morning, the air conditioning a distant memory as sweat beads on your skin. Your phone, barely charged, buzzes with a neighbor's text. Karen's bragging at the HOA meeting says you'll learn your lesson. The audacity of it burns, a slow smolder in your chest. David felt that same burn, his hands clenching as he stood in his darkened living room. He wasn't just powerless in the literal sense, woke to a world that felt off-kilter. The neighborhood carried on as if nothing had happened. Children laughed, sprinklers hissed, the mail truck rumbled down the street. But for David, the absence of electricity was a constant reminder of Karen's control. His coffee maker sat useless, his laptop dead, his garage workshop silent. He couldn't work, couldn't cook, couldn't even charge his phone without borrowing a neighbor's outlet. And the neighbors, though sympathetic, kept their distance. Karen's influence was a shadow over Willow Creek, her reputation for retribution keeping dissent in check. David spent the day piecing together the scope of Karen's power. A neighbor, too nervous to give her name, slipped him a note. Check the HOA records. She's done this before. At the local library, using a public computer, David dug into the HOA's public filings. What he found was a pattern: fines, liens, even utility shutoffs, targeting anyone who dared defy Karen's rules. She'd weaponized her position, using vague bylaws and her sway with local officials to enforce her will. The utility shutoff wasn't just a punishment. It was a message. Cross Karen Whitaker, and you'd pay a price steeper than a fine dot as the sun dipped below the horizon, creaking softly. The neighborhood was quiet now, the air carrying the faint scent of charcoal from a nearby barbecue. But inside David, a storm was brewing. He wasn't a vengeful man by nature, but Karen's actions had crossed a line. She'd taken his power literally and figuratively, and he wasn't going to let it stand. Years of working as an electrician had taught him more than just how to wire a circuit. He knew how to manipulate power, how to turn it into a tool. And Karen, with her sprawling mansion at the end of the cul-de-sac, had no idea what was coming. The rhythm of his life, once steady and predictable, had been disrupted. But David wasn't powerless, not yet. As he stared at the windmill, its silhouette stark against the fading light, an idea began to take shape. It was risky, dangerous even, but it was a way to fight back. Karen thought she could control the neighborhood with a flick of her pen. The air thick with the scent of blooming jasmine and the distant hum of a lawnmower. The neighborhood seems to breathe, its houses glowing softly, their windows alive with the flicker of evening routines. But at the edge of this calm, a plan is taking shape, a plan born of quiet defiance, its roots sinking deep into the soil of resentment. David Hensley, the man whose home Karen Whitaker plunged into darkness, is no longer just a victim. The person's fingers, calloused from years of stripping wires, now trace the edge of a notebook filled with sketches, diagrams of circuits, loops, and overloads. The individual is about to turn the tables, and Karen's mansion, that gleaming symbol of her authority, is the target. The morning after David's blackout, the neighborhood carried on its rhythm of daily life, children pedaling bikes, neighbors pruning roses, the soft clink of coffee mugs on patios. But for David, the world felt off-kilter, his home a silent shell without power. The windmill in his yard spun lazily, a reminder of the petty violation that had sparked Karen's wrath. Yet, as he sipped lukewarm coffee borrowed from a neighbor, David's mind wasn't on surrender. He'd spent the previous night sleepless, his thoughts crackling like live wires. Karen's mansion, a sprawling two-story behemoth at the cul-de-sac's end, loomed in his imagination, not as a home, but as a canvas for retribution. David knew electricity better than most. Years as an electrician had taught him its language. The hum of a well-wired circuit, the sharp snap of a breaker tripping, the faint ozone smell of an overload, was now a spark in his plan. Karen's mansion, with its chandeliers, heated pool, and air-conditioned garage, guzzled power like a small factory. He'd overload hers, frying her precious home and exposing her tyranny to the neighborhood. Imagine yourself in David's garage. Tools line the walls, screwdrivers, pliers, spools of copper, wire glinting under a battery-powered lantern. His laptop, charged at the library, displays a grainy PDF of Willow Creek's utility grid, downloaded from a public records site. David's eyes trace the lines feeding Karen's mansion, his fingers sketching a plan, a feedback loop, subtle but devastating, that would send a surge through her system. It wasn't about destruction. Not yet, but about chaos, a spectacle that would humiliate Karen as publicly as she'd humiliated him. The risk was high. Tampering with a private electrical system was illegal, and a miscalculation could spark a fire. But the constant struggle of living under Karen's thumb outweighed his caution. David's first step was reconnaissance. Under the guise of a morning jog, he circled the cul-de-sac, his sneakers slapping the pavement in time with the neighborhood's pulse. Karen's mansion stood apart, its brick facade gleaming, its lawn a flawless emerald. Motion sensor lights flanked the driveway, and a security camera blinked above the garage. But David's trained eye spotted vulnerabilities. An exposed utility box near the property line, its lock rusted from years of neglect, and a service panel partially hidden by overgrown azaleas. The panel's hum was faint but steady, a heartbeat he could disrupt. He noted the details in his notebook, his handwriting tight and precise, each observation a step toward reclaiming his power. Back home, David worked in the dim glow of his lantern, assembling his tools. He stripped lengths of wire, crimped connectors, and tested a small transformer he'd salvaged from a job site. The device, no larger than a lunchbox, could amplify a current just enough to overload a system without tripping the main grid's safeguards. It was delicate work, the kind that demanded focus, the kind that drowned out the neighborhood's distant sounds, the laughter of children, the bark of a dog, the clatter of a garbage can. David's garage became a bubble, its air thick with purpose. He wasn't just rigging a circuit, he was crafting a statement. By evening, David had a prototype. He tested it on a small circuit board, watching the volts climb until a bulb flared and popped, its filament sizzling. The acrid scent of burnt plastic filled the garage, a warning of what was to come. Satisfied, he packed his tools into a nondescript backpack adding a pair of gloves and a black hoodie to avoid notice. The plan was simple. Access Karen's utility box under cover of night, install the transformer, and let the surge do the rest. Timing was critical. Karen hosted weekly HOA meetings at her mansion, her allies sipping wine in her chandelier-lit dining room. The next meeting was tomorrow night, perfect for maximum impact. Imagine yourself watching David slip out his back door, the neighborhood cloaked in midnight blue. The air carries the faint scent of dew and charcoal. The cicadas hum a soft backdrop. He moves with purpose, keeping to the shadows of oak trees, his backpack slung low. Karen's mansion looms ahead, its windows dark, save for a faint glow in the upstairs Studicarin, perhaps drafting another edict. David crouches by the utility box, his breath steady, his hands gloved. The lock yields to a pair of bolt cutters, the click barely audible. Inside, the wires are a familiar map, their insulation gleaming under his penlight. He works quickly, splicing the transformer into the circuit, his movements as precise as a surgeon's dot. As he closes the box, a car's headlights sweep the street, and David freezes, his pulse a drumbeat. The car passes a neighbor, not Karenand. He exhales, wiping sweat from his brow. The transformer is live, its faint hum blending with the night's sounds. Tomorrow, when Karen flips on her chandelier or cranks her AC, the surge will hit, frying her system in a cascade of sparks. David retreats, his sneakers silent on the grass, his mind alight with possibilities. He's crossed a line, but the constant struggle of Karen's rule has pushed him here. Her mansion, her throne, is now a ticking bomb. Back in his dark home, David sits by the windmill, its blades creaking in the breeze. The neighborhood sleeps, unaware of the storm brewing. He feels a strange calm, the kind that comes when a decision is made. Karen thinks she holds all the power, but David knows better. Electricity isn't just wires and volts, it's leverage, and he's just rewired the game. Imagine yourself standing in the heart of Willow Creek at twilight, the air heavy with the scent of honeysuckle and the distant crackle of a neighbor's fire pit. The neighborhood hums with the rhythm of daily life, porch lights flickering on the soft clatter of dishes from open windows. But tonight, at the end of the cul-de-sac, Karen Whitaker's mansion is about to become the stage for a spectacle. David Hensley, the man whose home she plunged into darkness, has set his plan in motion. The transformer he wired into her utility box last night lies dormant, a silent promise of chaos. As Karen prepares for her weekly HOA meeting, unaware of the trap, the neighborhood holds its breath, and the constant struggle between control and defiance is about to erupt in sparks. The evening began like any other in Willow Creek. Mansion glowed, its chandeliers casting golden light through tall windows, illuminating the manicured hedges and marble fountain in her front yard. Inside, HOA board members gathered their voices, a low murmur over the clink of wine glasses. Karen, in a crisp blazer, presided like a queen, her clipboard resting on the mahogany table. The agenda was routine fines for untrimmed lawns, complaints about barking dogs, but her tone carried the weight of unchallenged authority. Neighbors outside, sipping iced tea on their porches, glanced at the mansion with unease. Karen's power was a shadow over Willow Creek, and tonight it felt heavier than ever. David, meanwhile, sat in his darkened home, the air stale without the hum of his air conditioner. His windmill spun lazily outside, its creak a faint echo of his defiance. He'd spent the day double-checking his calculations, ensuring the transformer would deliver a surge strong enough to fry Karen's electrical system without endangering lives. The plan was precise. When Karen's mansion drew peak power likely during her meeting, with every light blazing and the AC roaring, the transformer would overload her circuits, plunging her home into chaos. David wasn't there to gloat. He stayed home, his lantern casting shadows on his notebook, waiting for the neighborhood's whispers to confirm his success. At 7:32 p.m., it happened. A sharp crack, like a whip snapping, echoed from the cul-de-sac. Karen's mansion flickered, its lights flaring blindingly bright before plunging into darkness. Inside, gasps and clinking glasses gave way to shouts. The chandelier in the dining room sparked, its crystals rattling as wires hissed. The air conditioner groaned, then died with a metallic screech. Smoke, acrid and sharp, curled from outlets, stinging the eyes of Karen's guests as they stumbled toward the door. Outside, neighbors gathered, their faces lit by phone screens, murmuring about the sudden blackout. The mansion, once a beacon of Karen's dominance, was now a smoldering shell, its windows dark, its fountain silent. Karen emerged, her face a mask of fury, her blazer smudged with soot. She barked orders at her board members, blaming the utility company, the weather, anything but her own actions. But the neighborhood's whispers grew louder. It's her fault. She pushed too far. David's transformer had worked perfectly, sending a surge that fried every circuit in the mansion. The damage was spectacular. Melted wiring, charred appliances, a security system reduced to a blinking red light. Karen's kingdom was in ruins, and the crowd outside felt a strange mix of awe and unease. The constant struggle of living under her rule had found a breaking point, but Karen wasn't one to surrender. As firefighters arrived, their sirens cutting through the night's humid air, she spotted David standing at the edge of the crowd, his face calm but his eyes sharp. Something clicked in her suspicion. Rage, certainty. She stormed, her heels clicking on the pavement, her voice a venomous hiss. "You did this, didn't you?" she spat, close enough for David to smell the wine on her breath. The crowd turned, their whispers falling silent. David said nothing, his silence a wall, but Karen's entitlement fueled her. She shoved him, her manicured nails catching his arm, drawing a thin line of blood. Imagine yourself in David's place, the air thick with tension, the scent of smoke and summer grass mingling. Karen's shove sends you stumbling, but you catch yourself, your pulse pounding. She's not done. She swings again, this time with a closed fist, her rage unhinged. David ducked, years of manual labor giving him reflexes she didn't expect. The crowd gasped, some stepping forward, others frozen. Karen's attack was wild, her screams incoherent words about violations, respect, her authority. David blocked her next swing, his hands steady, but he didn't strike back. He didn't need to. The neighborhood was watching, and Karen was unraveling. A neighbor, a retired teacher named Martha, stepped between them, her voice firm but calm. "Enough, Karen." Others joined her, forming a loose circle, their faces a mix of pity and disgust. Karen's fists dropped, her breath ragged, her blazer torn at the sleeve. The firefighters, now inspecting the mansion, called for her attention about faulty wiring, a potential hazard. But Karen's eyes stayed on David, burning with a promise of retribution. She didn't know how he'd done it, but she knew he was responsible. And David, standing in the flickering light of the fire truck, felt the weight of his victory and its cost. The brawl, brief but brutal, left its mark. David's arm stung, blood seeping through his sleeve, but he stood tall. The crowd dispersed, whispering about Karen's meltdown, about the blackout, about David's quiet defiance. The mansion's damage was extensive, thousands in repairs, weeks without power. Karen's guests, humiliated, slipped away, their loyalty to her shaken. For the first time, Willow Creek saw her not as a queen, but as a tyrant undone by her own hubris. David's plan had worked, but the fight had exposed him. Karen wasn't finished, and the neighborhood, now buzzing with rumors, was a tinderbox. As David walked home, the air cool against his skin, he felt the neighborhood's pulse shift. The windmill in his yard creaked, a steady rhythm against the chaos of the night. He'd struck a blow against Karen's control, but the constant struggle wasn't over. She'd come for him harder, meaner, with every tool at her disposal. And David, now a marked man, knew the next move would demand more than wires and transformers. The surge had lit up the night, but the real fire was just beginning. Imagine yourself standing in the aftermath of a storm, the air still charged with the scent of scorched metal and damp grass. Willow Creek, once a picture of suburban calm, now hums with whispers, its streets alive with the fallout of Karen Whitaker's downfall. Her mansion, dark and wounded from David Hensley's electrical surge, looms at the cul-de-sac's end, a monument to her shattered authority. The neighborhood's rhythm of daily life, children's laughter, the soft clink of sprinklers feels fragile, as if the ground itself might shift again. David, the quiet electrician who dared to fight back, stands at the center of this upheaval. His victory within reach, but laced with a cost he's only beginning to understand. And what lies beneath will change everything. The morning after the surge, Willow Creek buzzed with a nervous energy. Neighbors gathered in small clusters, their voices low as they recounted the night's chaos. Karen's mansion sparking her frantic attack on David, the crowd's stunned silence. The air carried the faint tang of smoke, a reminder of the surge's damage. David woke to a home still without power, his refrigerator silent, his windmill creaking outside. But the neighborhood's mood had shifted. Karen's outburst had stripped away her veneer of control, and whispers of her overreach spread like wildfire. David, nursing a bruised arm from her attack, felt the weight of eyes on him, some admiring, others wary. She called the utility company, demanding answers about the faulty wiring the firefighters had cited. She contacted the HOA board, spinning a tale of sabotage and painting David as a dangerous renegade. Her entitlement, though battered, burned bright. She saw the surge not as a defeat, but as a challenge to her authority. By noon, she'd filed a formal complaint with the county, accusing David of tampering with her property. The complaint, laced with half-truths, demanded his arrest and a lien on his home. Karen's wrath was a storm of its own, and David was in its path. But Willow Creek wasn't the same neighborhood it had been a week ago. The surge had done more than fry Karen's mansion. It had sparked questions. Martha, the retired teacher, who'd stopped Karen's attack, organized an impromptu meeting at her home. Neighbors crowded her living room, the air thick with the scent of coffee and tension. Martha, her voice steady, shared what she'd learned from David's library research. Karen's history of utility shutoffs, unexplained fines, and cozy ties with county officials. The room buzzed with outraged stories of Karen's bullying poured out, from liens on single mothers' homes to threats against elderly residents. David, invited but silent, listened as the neighborhood found its voice. The constant struggle under Karen's rule had united them, and they wanted answers. Martha proposed a bold move, petitioned the county to audit the HOA's records. David, hesitant to draw more attention, agreed to share his findings. Using a neighbor's laptop, he presented the documents he'd uncovered: emails, invoices, and utility records, suggesting Karen had manipulated the grid to punish dissenters. One email, sent to a utility board member, hinted at kickbacks for fast-tracking shutoffs. The neighbors gasped. Karen hadn't just ruled Willow Creek, she'd profited from it. The audit, if approved, could expose her scams, but it would also shine a spotlight on David's sabotage. He faced a choice: stay silent and risk Karen's retaliation, or push forward and face legal consequences. Imagine yourself in David's shoes, the weight of that decision pressing against you. The room smells of lavender candles and old books. The neighbors' faces a mix of hope and fear. You've struck a blow against a tyrant, but the cost is creeping closer. Police questions, lawsuits, maybe jail. David chose to push forward. He handed over his notebook, its pages filled with diagrams and utility records, to Martha. "Do it," he said, his voice low but firm. The petition was drafted that night, signed by 24 neighbors, and filed with the county by morning. Willow Creek was no longer Karen's kingdom. It was a community waking up. The county's response was swift. They seized files, laptops, even Karen's precious clipboard. The investigation uncovered a web of corruption, falsified utility bills, unauthorized shutoffs, and payments to a shell company linked to Karen's cousin. She'd siphoned thousands from HOA dues, using the funds to maintain her mansion's extravagance while strong-arming residents into compliance. The utility shutoff against David was the tip of the iceberg, a tactic she'd used 5 times before, each time targeting a problem resident. The auditor's report, leaked to the local paper, hit Willow Creek like a second surge. Karen's downfall was complete. The county revoked her HOA presidency, and criminal charges loomed: fraud, embezzlement, even tampering with public utilities. Neighbors gathered outside her hotel, not to protest but to watch, their phones recording as she loaded suitcases into her SUV. Her face, once smug, was haggard, her blazer replaced by a wrinkled sweater. She left Willow Creek that week, her mansion still dark, its sale pending to cover legal fees. The neighborhood exhaled, the air lighter, the scent of jasmine sweeter. David's victory, though, came at a cost. The auditors questioned him about the surge, and a security camera near Karen's mansion had caught a hooded figure, likely him, near the utility box. He admitted nothing, but the county issued a fine for suspected tampering, and whispers of a civil suit lingered. His power was restored. The windmill still spun, but David felt the neighborhood's gaze shift. Some saw him as a hero, others a vigilante. The constant struggle had ended, but it left scars on his arm, his record, his peace. As David sat on his porch, the evening air cool against his skin, He watched the neighborhood settle into its rhythm. David had rewired more than a circuit. He'd rewired a community. And though the cost was heavy, he'd do it again. The constant struggle was over, but its echoes would linger, a reminder that power, like electricity, could spark both light and fire.